Welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for September 11th, 2024. Before we get started, does anybody have any announcements they'd like to share? Okay, if we don't have any announcements, then I will go to reminders. Again, reminder to nominate people for the Contributor Spotlight. That's a quarterly program we do to sort of recognize some great contributions from one of the contributors. In terms of CPC and board meeting updates, oh, I see Joy's here. That's good. Let me promote her. In terms of the CPC and board meeting updates, I don't think we have, well, we don't have either of our reps. So I don't think there's any update on that front. So that takes us to the issues that were tagged for the list. We'll start with number 54563, because that one was tagged, and we have Guy here as a guest to chat about that. So I don't know, Guy, if you or Joey want to jump into that one to start. And
Yeah, if I can give a brief-ish summary, there's quite a lot of context and background here, but if it helps, I can maybe just try and give that summary. But please let me know if there's any questions or clarifications. The the issue in discussion is a name bike shedding issue, but I think the context is important as well. So. Um, with the introduction of require asm, we introduced a new type of interop in terms of what require asm provides to CommonJS. So the shape of the module that require asm returns depends on the structure of that module. So it's a dynamically inspected interop pattern that is only happens for require asm. And the problem space that I'm working in is the transpilation of CommonJS into ASM. So this is what JSPM does. It's done it for many years, but it's kind of like based on the hypothesis that like the future of transpilation is the transpilation of CJS into ASM. And like if you think of build tools like Rollup, etc., they will kind of do this internally at some level. Um, And therefore, they need to also deal with this interop in the transpiled CJS to ASM of this new interop pattern. And one of the problems I hit when implementing that was that um, given an arbitrary module, if you've got a dynamically sourced module, you don't know which interop pattern to use because you need to know what format it was originally consumed in. And so this is where the idea of a marker comes in, which is that if we have a marker on the module that says this was originally a CJS module, it's now an ESM module, but it was originally CJS, so you can treat it and give it those interop patterns as if it came from CJS. That helps a lot of those interop cases a whole bunch. And so I was like, well, when we import a CommonJS module, if we have a marker on the CommonJS module, that would be really, really useful. And conversely, supporting that marker in this new require interop pattern would simplify and standardize the interop. And so the overall idea is that in the interop pattern in Node, that this marker supports lifting and lowering on both sides. And in patterns where it's transpiled, that it supports lifting and lowering on both sides, and that those two kind of scenarios can interact. And so if we can standardize on this flag, we can get sort of full transitivity between these various use cases, which I think is a very important property, like lifting and lowering as many times as you need through the systems, so that you don't end up in situations like we have with the current interop, where you get sort of default sort of things. So the short version is this flag is CJS unwrap default, which says if you see this flag, you know that the module was originally basically has a specific representation for require that is just the default export off of that ES module. So that's my attempt at a summary of the complex interop landscape in in 5 minutes or so. But the bike shedding issue is specifically, should we call this flag CJS unwrap default, or should we call it module.export as a string exported on the ES module? And I guess one of the things that I have done in the spike shed issue is I've tried to follow the common consensus. Um, and this module that exports suggestion came out at the last minute, and is now blocking the proposal from moving forward. And so it would be great if we can come to a conclusion on what to call this thing. To go through the two cases, and Jory can also flesh this out further. It's having a ECMAScript module that exports a default, which is the like common JS module that should be exposed when you require that module. So it's when you're doing a require asm pattern, uh, it's the flip side of the interop that simplifies the kind of require case of the asm module and allows alternative representations of modules exposed to require that came from asm. Because right now today, if you require an asm module, you will only get the namespace shape. And so the flip side of this interop was actually becomes a feature for require asm, which is you can provide a default export and use this flag, and the default export can be a function or any type of value that's not an asm namespace that is then available to the require. And so you provide a default export per the current interrupt semantics, but then you also provide this flag that tells you to use that default and unwrap it. That's why it's called CJS unwrap default. Joy's suggestion was that we could actually export this as a module that exports string name explicitly. I'll link to her proposal as well in case folks haven't read it. Let me see if I can. GitHub will let me copy the issue. It won't actually let me copy the link directly to. Oh well, okay, here we go. So I've just posted that in the chat. So she summarized the two cases. In the module.exports case, module.exports would be the string name of the exported representation. And yeah, we can go into the actual bike shed arguments from there, but I just wanted to share some sort of wider background of why we're doing all this.
I don't know, Joy, if you want to add to that.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So about the interop thing, another thing that we didn't have consensus on is whether this flag should be reused for that thing, because we'll then have to add a new name to all the imported CJS, which would be technically a breaking change. Another idea is to just add an API that returns true if this thing, if this module that you imported is a CJS. That can be done with a wiki map. That would be like a transparent single minor API that doesn't really change anything as far as users can tell.
Joy's
So
suggestion here is an alternative to the interop problem in
yes,
these kind of transpiled workflows where you can actually import a utility method like is CJS module or is asm module to find out if the thing that you're looking at was originally a CJS or asm module, and then you can do the correct interop paths.
or like you can even do better, like giving some type of that module, like not just a CJS, but actual. But that can be like, I think that would be like more generally useful API compared to
I think the difficulty is that a lot of these interrupt patterns need to be designed in a platform agnostic way. And if we rely on Node.js specific APIs and these interrupt patterns, they're no longer suitable in bundler transpilation workflows of CJS to ASM. So we immediately create a divergence between those two interrupt patterns, and then we break transitivity on the joins, right? So
if you count on the node ESM module loader to add this flag for import CJS, then you're already counting on node to do this because you can never persuade browsers to do this when they import CJS.
I'm
Well, that
describing a bundler interrupt pattern that would unify with Node's interrupt pattern.
right, but you're already counting on something very node specific.
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
If you count on the node module loader to do this, then it's already node specific.
So the node module loader adding a flag is a kind of a pattern that any tool can also follow. So if we've got a flag like CJS unwrap default, the idea is that bundlers and other tools can also implement this, and the modules that they construct in their bundles would then interrupt under this pattern with node.js workflows in a way that's transitive.
I think we can still do that with a method instead of adding something to the namespace, like basically polluting the namespace.
Right.
But that would be a separate question.
The argument against it is that if you rely on Node.js built-ins in interrupt patterns, you no longer have universally platform general interrupt patterns.
Yeah, I think we'll need different discussions about polluting the namespace. But this is just about the backshare about the name.
So to clarify, there's two issues here. The one issue is when you import a CommonJS module that we want to also add this flag. And right now, when you import a CommonJS module today, we run a static analysis on that CommonJS module because of execution ordering invariants that needed to be maintained. That determines the list of named exports for that CommonJS module. And we then create a module namespace that extends those named exports, but the default is still the module.exports value. And this would add not just that list of analyzed exports, but also this new CJS unwrap default. So if you pass that object back into a require_ism workflow, it would know to just read off the default as the value that it should be represented in a require workflow. And today we don't have the CJS unwrap default on that. So strictly speaking, it's a breaking change on the shape of a namespace for an import of a CommonJS module because it would be on every namespace when you import it. And so I've split this overall sort of pattern into two PRs, one on the require side, one on the import side, both adding support for this flag. The one on the import CommonJS side is treated as a major change, which would need to go out in a subsequent major release of Node.js. But the one we're focusing on now is the first PR, which just adds support for CommonJS modules to lower this pattern. So CommonJS modules, when you require ism, if it sees this marker, it'll just read the default off. And then we'll do a second breaking change on a major version to add this to all ECMAScript imports of require namespaces. Again, please do ask any questions if anyone has any further clarifying points.
Yeah. Can we maybe clarify? So we're talking about modules written in EMS, right? And what happens when we require them? Is that correct?
Sorry, I think it was a bit unclear there. Can you just repeat that again for me?
Yeah, I was asking for, can we clarify? So we're talking about modules written in ESM syntax, right? And what happens when we require them?
It's basically if you have a ESM, but you have a CommonJS. For example, you have a CommonJS module that is module that exports equals something instead of just assigning exports, which replaces that thing. Now you want to upgrade it to ESM because now require ESM is possible, so you can ship ESM now. And then you do export default something, that wouldn't translate well for your CommonJS users because per ESM rules, that thing would be require something dot default. That thing will be dot default. That would be similar to the import, dynamic import, the thing you get from dynamic import. So the idea is we need some kind of flag from the module authors tell us to do this unwrapping. We cannot just do this unwrapping like automatically because then otherwise the named exports might be lost, or maybe they are intentionally trying to make it dot default. So we kind of need something from the module loaders to specify this behavior. So we're kind of like just bike shedding what this hint should be written by module authors when they try to upgrade a CommonJS module to ESM module. This only is useful for people who reassign module exports. Not super useful. Like it's not relevant if you do not do any of those. If you only like if you only do export that something equals something, or if you don't export something special, like you don't ask people to do const foo equals require foo. Like you always tell if you only always tell your users to deconstruct your namespace, then it's not really an issue for you. This is only relevant if you replace this module exports. But yeah,
Okay.
I'm not
And
sure if I
when we say flag, we don't mean CLI flag, right? We mean
no. We
some
mean
kind of marker in the file.
yeah, some kind of marker. It's more like a marker in the module.
Okay.
Like a special name in the module that you export to tell Node to just unwrap the default. And this needs to be written by human beings, not really a tool specific thing. Unlike the underscore ES module thing. This is something people need to write.
This is on the require side. So as I said, there's two sides to this. There's the require side, which is this current PR, which does have author intent, where you can say, hey, we now support requireism. I'm going to convert all my CommonJS dependent, my CommonJS libraries into ESM, and I'm going to rewrite them as ESM. But if you have a library that does module.exports equals a class, that's not going to work for converting it to ESM, because your CommonJS users are going to get a when they require it, they're going to get a namespace object with a default export when you didn't want them to get that namespace type. You wanted them to just get the class you wrote. And so with this pattern, you can say export CJS unwrap default true. And when require ESM kicks in, it sees that flag, it reads the default, and it returns that value directly instead of the namespace. So you maintain backwards compat. So you can actually update from CJS to ESM in a more backwards compatible way, because it will support all the shapes that CommonJS currently supports. But the other side of this, as I said at the beginning, is also supporting this when you import CommonJS to support transitive interop and allow automatic transpilation of CommonJS into ESM, where it will be done by tools.
And the second point is not agreed, but the first point is. That's why we're actually about the first point.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's a valid use case for lots of projects to want to transpile into ESM from CommonJS. And I think solving those interrupt problems is a primary concern that I have here. Adding this feature for seamless upgrade paths from CommonJS to ESM is like also really great. But I'm doing this for the transpilation interop reasons, not for that reason. And getting alignment with the transpilation on interop remains my goal here.
I mean, no matter what the name is, kind of doesn't really matter for the second point. It's just a name. So we're trying to bike shed about the name, and the discussion here is specifically about what the name should look like. The two written in the comment that we pasted in the chat is like they're basically equivalent, except that with the module exports alternative, you could actually export something that's different than where you export default from the ESM, which may be useful, maybe not. But I guess for the second one, you can always work around it.
Yeah, so I think the important point here is that we've kind of reached a point in the discussion on the naming where we're not able to resolve the bike shed, and hence the TSC discussion. So I don't know what the best technique is to obtain that consensus. Would it be to what we could do is discuss the two options in a little bit more detail and then do a vote, or if there's someone on the TSC who would like to suggest a process for breaking this, that would be really appreciated. I'm sorry.
Personally, I would just be in favor of a vote, either within the TSC or with more people, because I mean, hardest problem in computer science, naming a variable. So why not just have a vote?
We've got one hand.
Yeah, Antoine has his hand up.
Just a question, maybe before we talk about voting. Have we considered checking if there's only a default export, then it should be the module.export. Then we don't need any special, well, we don't need to agree on what flag to use. Then if folks don't want it to be the default, they can just export anything else. Am I making sense? Like, I'm not sure we need a flag. If we can just decide that, oh, there's only one default export, then it should be the module.export. That makes sense.
Joy, did you want to
James has his hand up next.
Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I don't, just a couple of points. One, I don't think we necessarily need to go straight to a vote. If folks can go in and just take some time to weigh in, think about it first and see if we can resolve it through discussion before we go to a vote. If there's a particular time crunch that requires us to go right to a vote, then okay, but I would just like to see a little bit more discussion, see if we can resolve it that way. Two, I don't think relying just on the default export works. So in workers, we've done this for a while where we can use either import or require for these modules, whether it's a CommonJS module or an ESM. There was the original design. If you required an ESM, you got the module namespace. The feedback was that that's not what folks wanted. They wanted it to where when they required the ESM, they got the default export. We ended up having to put that behind what we call a compatibility flag, which is a configuration option for the worker. Having an explicit flag in there makes things a lot easier. We end up having to support both, but I don't think, because these modules that are being required end up having multiple named exports and stuff. We can't really control that, and I'd rather have something more explicit than try to apply some implicit heuristic. So that's it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just add, like, I think if we decide to go back and like James was suggesting, give people more time, I think it would still be useful to like near the bottom of the issue or something, say like, here are the two current proposal, if you had to choose one, basically clearly just outline, here are the two proposals. And, we're looking for feedback. If you had to choose one, what would it be? Or, suggestions. I think that would help people jumping in.
So I guess we go with the usual TSC process, which is you wait for, I don't know how, maybe a week before we decide whether we want to have a vote. Is that the conclusion?
Yeah,
I think that was James' suggestion. Does anybody have any concerns with that?
I think it's good to give folks time to weigh in on the issue. I mean, we've had a few already. Yeah, certainly it's good that we've been able to raise attention on the issue. So let's see if we can build some more momentum with that.
Okay, so I think we have, we're at the half hour a minute time, so maybe we should move to other issues. Sounds like, thanks, the guy and Joy for filling in the background for people, and the ask is for people to go in and help move that discussion along.
Can I
And
just
we'll leave on the
ask
agenda
for-
till next week.
Yeah, so just ask for what the follow-up is here, just to summarize. So would we leave it on the agenda for 1 week and then bring it up at the next week's meeting again for the TSC and then seek a vote?
Yeah, we'll leave it on the agenda and we can see next week, like, is it now making progress or is it like still stuck and we think it, we call for a vote or something like that.
Yeah, it would be great to know that it's not getting lost in the process and that it will remain on the agenda so far as it's not resolved or something like that. Would help a lot. So
Yeah, no, we'll definitely leave it on the agenda till next time.
great. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next issue, which is number 54597, which is V8 backport of F3, blah, 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 the CV related one. If anybody wants to jump in on that discussion, I'm just looking to see who tagged it. I see Matteo, you added it. Do you want to just give an overview of what you wanted us to discuss? If you're talking, Matteo, you're on mute.
Sorry guys, I'm a little bit sick today. So it's the issue about Undici. It's so the situation
Actually,
here.
sorry, we're on the issue before that, which is the
okay.
CV backport.
Oh, okay. So, the reason is I added it. I think this has been in for a few times. Okay. So I added it, and I think we discussed it last time. And
Okay.
basically, we agreed that we will not backport this unless we are perfectly sure, and it's part of the I think the TSG agenda can be removed.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I remember we did discuss last week, and
We did
we
discuss.
basically, Richard asked that people look at the existing documentation to say, like, that pretty much says we wouldn't do it, and people were to think about, like, is there any, if anybody had thought like, hey, we could add some documentation somewhere to make it clearer or whatever, then they could propose a PR. So, okay, I'll take it off the agenda. So while I do that, if you want to jump into the next one, because the next one is the Indici one.
Which also was maybe discussed a little bit. I don't remember. As I said, I'm a little bit sick today, so not functioning at my best.
Sure, let me just take a quick look. I'm opening it up. Yes, we did discuss that last time. I think, yeah, we discussed last time as well. The question is, like, should we discuss some more? I think in the end it was like, we might be open to exposing more, but not necessarily all of Indici at this time.
Yeah, but I need to go back to
Right.
like today. I'm not functioning. Sorry, Michael.
Yeah.
I'm not at my best, so I cannot.
Okay, so I think what I'll do is I'll take that off the agenda, and if it's like we can, you've got some feedback there, and if you want to add it back on next time, you can do that. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. We'll discuss next time. Okay, and so finally, the last one, well, not the last issue that was tagged for the engine is let's talk about the CI situation. I don't know if, I think Antoine, you created that. Do you want to lead off, kick off the discussion?
Okay. So the CI on the node repo is not at its best. Maybe it caught the same bug as Matteo. Probably not. Well,
Right.
the thing is, it's very hard to get a green CI nowadays. And a lot of issues come from, so we have flaky tests. So it's either the tests are written in a way that, yeah, it's not always like, there are some flakes with it, or maybe we have actual bugs in Node that are being triggered by the CI. And also the machines themselves, they are also experiencing problems such as a disk space issue. Again, probably there's a real bug behind that. So maybe someone from the build working group can maybe shed some light on that, because I don't know exactly know. But yeah, that's the situation currently. And I opened this so we can discuss how we can do better. The
I
Yagis
see, I
has his
guess
hand up.
has his hand up.
Yes, so in the past in the past week, couple of Node.js collaborators reached out to me publicly and privately to tell that they're so frustrated with the status of the CI that they started to contribute less to Node.js because basically it's nearly impossible to land a PR. I personally have 24 different open pull requests. At least 5, 6 of them are related to flaky tests, and the rest are, I assume that's a bug, but because we are at this current state that without looking at the CI, we always assume that it's flake. People resume builds, and because of that, it causes the flakiness to continue and have bigger impacts, such as impacting machines. But at the end, the most impactful thing with the CI problem is getting collaborators frustrated enough so that they stop contributing to the Node.js, and that's the most important thing in my opinion.
I think like the fundamental issue, I think, is that like we don't have anybody who's willing to spend time, or not enough people who are willing to spend time to focus on, investigating or fixing flaky tests versus adding new PRs. And it builds up over time. The OSX issue made it worse, but like as Antoine mentioned, maybe there's something in the test which is generating lots of stuff, and that actually made it worse, because nothing on the machine, as far as we know, made things worse. And I guess I just don't know how we avoid, if we don't invest in keeping things green, I don't know how we avoid situations like this.
So I as far as I remember, Linux Foundation was supposed to, so before doing that, um I think we have too many machines, and maintaining all of them requires a full-time job. And even though Build Working Group and Richard and Michael, they're all doing amazing work for a volunteer thing, I think it would be unfair to expect them to manage hundreds of devices on their free time, on their work time, or without properly getting paid and managing all of those things. So I just wanted to say that beforehand. What I wanted to ask is that, as far as I remember, the Linux Foundation was supposed to get introduced into our infrastructure, and their IT administrators were supposed to, as far as I know, manage or lead a couple of the process there. But who has the newest information regarding that?
I have my hand up so I can add some context on that. Like one, I don't think hoping that it's just a machine issue. Like these are not just machine issues in terms of the flakes. It's not because the machines are flaking. They're flaky tests. They have nothing to do with the machines. The OSX was a very specific issue. The Linux Foundation, there is Ryan has started to get involved. So if you see Ryan doing things, he's working with Ulysses on trying to get some new Mac infrastructure up and running. So they are helping there, but it's effectively adding somebody to the build working group versus taking ownership of the actual infrastructure itself. And I don't know, Richard, but like I think the sense is like it's not like we see flakes on one particular, like it's not the machines that need cleanup. It's just like there's flakes across all the machines because the tests flake, not because the machines do anything.
Yeah, I mean it's a combination. Yeah, it's a combination of those things. There are occasionally machine issues. The macOS issue, like you've alluded to, has been a particularly acute one over the last week and a bit. And I don't think anyone in build has any idea why it's suddenly so bad. So for some background, we've always been tight on disk space on the macOS machines because they are, or they were, pre-allocated storage, and for some reason the builds on macOS were a lot bigger than builds on other platforms. So just as an if people aren't aware, we actually ran out of space on the GitHub runners as well, and that was actually due to GitHub changing the runners. But the macOS machines that we're running on our own infrastructure, we haven't actually updated what's installed on those. So it's, as far as we know, been running the same things as we're running a month ago. And for some reason, as of last week, we just kept running out of disk space. So there wasn't anything obvious that seems to suggest that Node has suddenly ballooned in size. And we've eliminated things like there's a known issue where at least one test is causing Node to write files into the temp directory, and those never get cleaned up. But I've kind of eliminated that on macOS, and we were still running out of space. So yeah, there's some unknown reason that the macOS builds are slowly filling up the disk space. It's very difficult. If anyone's more familiar with Macs and can work out where the space is going, because the recovery was to basically delete a whole bunch of macOS caches and then physically reboot the machine. And if we could figure out how to avoid having to need to reboot the machine, there would be a lot less maintenance. I mean, ultimately, the work that Ulysses and Ryan are doing to migrate those onto ephemeral macOS images on a new Walker setup should, in theory, make those disk space issues go away in macOS. But I mean, that's one particular issue that snowballed over the weekend because it meant people were pushing more builds through Jenkins. So we then started running out of space on the main Jenkins node because each build takes up log space on the Jenkins machines. So yesterday the main Jenkins node actually ran out of space because of just the number of builds. So we have a cleanup script there that deletes builds other than 21 days. So it actually means that within the last 21 days we've had a lot more builds through the system than we would otherwise expect. But one of the issues we have with flakes is every time you rerun a build, the resume build functionality. So just to be clear, if people aren't aware, resume build is not something we implemented. Resume build is something that comes out of one of the Jenkins plugins that we sort of get for free because we happen to be using that plugin to implement the CI jobs. That plugin, the way it works is it reruns anything that hasn't passed. So that includes builds where we had flakes that were marked as flakes. So if you look in Jenkins, the build is yellow. Those will get rerun if you resume. So there's more load through the system. And if you have tests that are failing but aren't flakes, that they are flaky, and you rerun a build and that fails, then that will cause that the whole build to fail. So some of the sort of things that have been happening on the PRs where a run failed and then you rerun it and then it's a different test that's failing in on another platform slash thing. It's all being compounded by the fact that we've not done a really good job of flakes. So for people watching the call or looking at the minutes, I don't think we've got an issue detecting flakes. You know, we've got automation in the reliability repo. And I think there was even an experiment to add build pulse to the Windows machines, and that was enabled, but I don't know if anyone's actually been looking at the build pulse results. So I think, you know, we've got enough people looking at the CI to be able to identify we have failing tests, let's mark them flaky, or you know, get fed up enough to say let's mark them flaky. The main issue is what do we do with the flakes once we mark them with flakes? And we're just accumulating flakes at the moment. And occasionally we have drives, like I think at quite a few of the sort of club summits, people have got together and tried to tackle the CI state. And it's like spurts, you know, we get more flakes and more flakes, and then eventually people get so fed up they actually try and tackle them. And then it gets a bit better, and then it happens again. And, you know, it's not just limited to the CI. We see that, I mean, the release team keep going on about Sitgem, or, you know, collaborators keep going about Sitgem and how it's difficult to triage results from that. And it's the same thing where, you know, we know that we run these CIs, they reveal problems. And then the question is, what are you doing with these problems? Are you just hiding them by, you know, marking them as flaky and then saying, well, you know, we're aware these happen, but, you know, we'll just ignore them for now. And then you're just continuously ignoring them, and they just mount up and up and out and up, and then eventually the sheer number of them are causing issues, you know, with other things coming into the system. And yeah, I think fundamentally there is, you know, perhaps some maneuvering for automation and tooling, but I think fundamentally you're looking at a resourcing thing, which is the only way to really drive this down is to get people to look at the failures when they start happening, or flakes, and make decisions as to, you know, what are we going to do with these? Are we, you know, if we ignore them, how long for? Is there a point where we have to start, you know, taking tests out because, okay, if no one's looking at them and they're flaking, what's the value of those tests?
Matteo has his hand up next.
So there are two things here on like I took a look at some of the flakes from either now and then, okay, and typically, okay, like in a lot of cases, they are related to timing differences on odd platforms in IO. So it's a lot of the stuff, some of the stuff in NAT, TCP, HTTP can be slightly off because some of those systems have low resources, and something that's passing on a developer machine or even on GitHub Actions is not passing on our CI system. Okay, so it's very odd in those cases because it's literally without having that system available for logging in and testing, it's very hard to even find out, okay, on how to fix it, okay? Because locally you can run a test 1,000 times, it passes enoughly, okay? But in that system, because of that combination of operating system, resources, disk speed, whatever, it's all completed, okay? It's all done it can cause this flakiness, okay? Like we can see like for some stuff, okay, for some tests to get them green, I had to essentially say, okay, let's skip, I don't know, AIX, because I cannot get a pass on an AIX on this. It's impossible. Or let's skip Windows. I don't know. I'm saying it loud, okay? Because it's in some cases it's literally impossible to get the same test passing on both systems at the same time. Okay, and we don't have access to those machines. Like a lot of cases, tests are flaky on Windows. Okay, this is the case of 90% of, like in a lot of the time, I'm fighting with Windows tests being flaky. And now with Windows, what do you do? Okay, I don't have a Windows, a powerful enough Windows machine to build Node. So how can I fix those? Okay, now it's on the table that I can buy one. Okay, and probably I should, but this is a question mark for everybody. Like, what do we do with this case? Okay, because it's literally, some of it is literally we don't have the resources or the staff even to tackle the problem on those, for some of those flakiness. Yeah, I'm done.
Sorry, I've somehow closed all my windows and can't get the window back. So I see a Joey
Joey.
got the hand up next though.
It's me. I think at the end of the day, it's just lack of volunteers to actually look into them. Like previously, we had like people kind of count on the Santa to fix them. Previously we had the Santa whose name is Richard, and the Santa is no longer busy with us anymore. So I think Rich didn't have a Windows machine either, but he would just try to take a stab at it and use the CI with the Windows job to try to see if it can be fixed, or like actually going to people who like reach out to people who might know how to fix it in private and ask for help. So like that's how you fix it. You like that kind of volunteer doesn't even need to know how to actually fix everything in Node, because it's such a huge code base. So it's impossible for you to know everything. But you kind of like need some kind of driving force to actually constantly take care of the CI, especially looking at the daily CI. Like the daily master CI has been failing for, I guess it has been always red at this point. I don't know. I just like check out the last, I don't know, 20 runs, and they have been red for like 20 days. So like we just need some volunteer to actually start looking into the flakes, either at the daily master job or the reliability reports, to actually start fixing them, because otherwise the issue always come back again if people still count on someone else to fix it. And I don't know how we can get enough volunteers, but just throwing that out there. And another point I'm trying to make is that I fixed some of the flakes before. I think it's like a 50-50 chance whether it's a problem with the test or whether it's a problem with the bug. The timing issue that Matteo mentioned is usually a problem with the tests. It's not necessarily a problem with the infra, because the flake can reproduce in certain circumstances. It's just that on certain infra is easier to reproduce, but the test is not robust in the first place. And on another case, in other cases that I found, which is actually not that uncommon, is that there is a bug, and you only see them in odd platforms only because it's easier for them to reproduce. I once fixed some kind of memory corruption in V8 that only reproduce on dynamically linked OpenSSL, but that has nothing to do with dynamically linked OpenSSL. It's just like on that platform, it's somehow slower and easier to reproduce that memory corruption. So we always need someone to actually look into them instead of marking them as flaky, because if the bug keeps staying there, then it can continue to flake other tests. And marking one test as flaky when you don't have a clear idea whether it's the whether the problem is lying in the test can kind of like cause like it will not stop the flakes from happening, because it can spread to other tests. So yeah, that's I think that's all for me.
Jaggers had his hand up next.
So, um, I what was I going to say? Sorry, I forgot. I will come. I will raise my hand when I remember. Sorry.
Okay, Richard has hand up.
Yeah, just to go back to Mateo's question, if you need access to machines, you can open a request in the build repo, and normally we will be able to, give you access to a machine if it's a Windows machine. I know there is a document somewhere in the build repo that describes how to create temporary VMs on Azure for collaborators to use to, troubleshoot test issues. So, if it is only being seen on some platform that you can't reproduce on your own, the build team can give collaborators access to those machines on a temporary basis for investigating those things.
Okay, Yagas, I see you have your hand up.
Yes. So, I'm really sorry. So my question is, um, so I had an open flaky test pull request which couldn't get landed for more than 10 hours due to the flakiness of the CI and other tests. And the procedure to land flaky tests are so strict that we couldn't act fast and we couldn't solve the problem earlier. So I would like to talk about how we could land setting a flaky test a lot more faster than we could right now.
I guess from my perspective, the thing is we need to get consensus on our approach. Do we just say we're ignoring it and we mark it as flaky? Or do we need to do some work or whatever? Because that I think will flow into, okay, how do we have consensus that we should just mark them quickly as flaky or not? I see Joey has her hand open.
I think for that pull request in particular, I think for that you just need to mark that one extra flaky test making the CI fail as flaky. Because that's a pull request marking flaky test as flaky, then you just add one more to the mix and it will pass. Because it's impossible that the pull request is actually causing that test to flake in the first place. So I think that would, at least for this particular case, that would work. For other cases, if you're actually trying to fix a flaky test, I guess we can have some kind of exception for exceptional label, I don't know, CI verified by human, that kind of label for the bot to acknowledge that there are failures and they are checked by human beings, and it should require the person adding that label to give some explanation why they think this should be ignored. And I think that would be good enough. We can just trust people's judgment.
Have any comments or? I think I'd suggest we only have 2 minutes left, but I'd suggest a PR to our collaborator guide that says this is our policy for situation X. Right? Joey had a suggestion of well, we add this extra label and this happens and that PR is probably the right place to get input from the broader collaborative base and the other TSC members are yeah, do we have a consensus that that's the way we handle these specific cases? And then it would be documented as well. That makes sense. I think if there's no other comments, we are at the end. I'm thinking we can leave this on the agenda for next time as well, since we don't have everybody here and I'm not sure we've resolved the issues. So, anything else that we should chat about before we close out for this week? Okay, if not, well, thanks for everybody's time and we'll see everybody in GitHub and next time.